So every day, it's like picking through the gutter. You know, it's like, what are we going to talk about today? And it is really, we are at a crossroads, without question. But I'm going to get off the stage now and introduce the man that will host this evening, and he'll then introduce Eric Metaxas for you. This is the man that stands in this place every Sunday. He is brilliant. I've known him since 1999. He is funny. He is engaging, and more importantly than anything else, he carries the Spirit of Christ, and he loves people. So please welcome warmly Pastor Gino Geraci. Gino?
Well, I guess I'll use this for right now while I'm getting ready to introduce Eric Metaxas. Hey, thank you for coming, first of all. And I'm hoping and praying that this will be a time, not of discouragement, but of encouragement. That this will be a time where we get a bigger picture. Obviously, in this situation, we're not trying to tell anyone how to vote, but I am inviting you to examine your own heart and your own conscience as you make important decisions that are going to affect you, your family, and the country. Obviously, it's a great privilege to be able to introduce Eric Metaxas. For those of you who are here, you probably know who he is. He's a graduate of Yale. He along with John Stonestreet, was mentored by Chuck Colson and took over the Breakpoint ministry. He, the popular author of Bonhoeffer and Wilberforce and Miracles, and he's going to be telling you a little bit about his new book that's coming out. There are three people who I religiously listen to almost every day. One is John Stonestreet and Eric Metaxas jointly, Al Mohler, and Jim Dennison. I'm looking for Bible-based, factual information to help me think about the cultural trends and how to think about some of these important issues. So without further ado, let's give a warm Colorado welcome to Eric Metaxas.
Thank you. Wow. Now cut that out. They can't do that. You can't do that. Stop that. Wow. God bless you. Sit down quickly before it goes to my head. Quick, quick. Too late. It went to my head. Wow. Oh, praise God. Thank you so much for such a tremendously warm welcome. I can't believe I'm here. Thank you, Gino Geraci, for providing this sanctuary, and even before you, thanks to the AMP for providing this sanctuary. Right? Was this the dairy aisle right here? This was the dairy aisle. That's right. I remember it just like it was yesterday. Cereals were right there, right there. No, this is amazing. Well, there's so much I want to share, and first of all, I do want to say how grateful I am to be here. I love traveling around the country and meeting people. I just got to meet a whole bunch of you just now, signing books, and I should say this before I forget. My new book comes out June 14th. I'm going to be talking about that tonight, but it comes out June 14th, and I'm telling all my friends that the publisher says, if you're thinking about buying it, pre-order it. It makes a big difference in terms of like all of the bookstores and how much they order and all that if you pre-order it. And if you pre-order it, you get the cheapest price between now and when it comes out. And you'll also get it before it comes out. So I'm shamelessly asking you to please pre-order it. I really am. And I'll tell you why. Because, for people who think like a lot of us in this room do, working in this culture is an uphill battle. I don't need to tell you that, okay? I can start with the example of my friend Larry Taunton. Some of you, maybe you listened to my radio program or you watched, I interviewed him a couple times. Larry Taunton wrote a book about the faith of Christopher Hitchens. It is an amazing book. And it's a perfect example of what I'm talking about right now, is that it's an amazing book. And he was friends with Christopher Hitchens. Here's an evangelical Christian from Alabama, okay, who debated Christopher Hitchens and they actually became friends. And he found that Christopher Hitchens was not, behind the scenes, was not nasty. He was open, and they would have conversations. And they actually had 2 Bible studies on the Gospel of John taking a road trip when Hitchens was dying. Now, you're not going to hear about that in the mainstream media. Well, Larry Taunton wrote a book about it called The Faith of Christopher Hitchens. I read it, and I said, this is one of the best books I've ever read. It is brilliantly written. It is just like that perfect balance of a book where he's not, trading on his friendship with Christopher Hitchens. It's really respectful and beautiful, whatever. Now, the reason I bring this up is that in a normal world, he would be on every show talking about that book, and that book would be on the bestseller list for months. But he has hardly been able to do any TV on it, and that's why I'm sort of shameless with certain things where I say, please pre-order this book or whatever, because it's important that we get our side of the story out, because guess what? It's true, and there are plenty of people who they're depending on hearing that, and if they don't hear that story or meet that person or know that this guy Larry Taunton exists, the media's view of, let's say, conservatives or Christians is very skewed. And I just think we have to understand that it's important for us to push to get out there for a fair hearing, because it's my belief, and this is really where I want to start, that in this country, if the truth gets a fair hearing or something close to a fair hearing, most Americans will go, you know what, I agree with that, I hadn't heard that before. But we live in a culture where they're not hearing it at all. And if you don't hear it at all, if you only hear one side of the story, you really can't make a wise decision. So if you're looking for another book to buy, I'm not kidding, Larry Taunton's book, The Faith of Christopher Hitchens, you could give that book to anybody. And I think that's another thing that I always hope in my books, is to write a book that you could share it with anybody. It's not just written for people who think like me. In fact, the whole idea is to talk to people on the other side of the conversation. But that is a great, great book, The Faith of Christopher Hitchens. I want to tell you a little bit about my story. And how I came to write this book and my view of things. The main reason I want to tell you my story is that it's the immigrant perspective that I want to bring to this story. My parents came to this country in the 50s. My dad came from Greece. My mom came from Germany. They met in an English class in New York City. And some of you probably have heard me say this before, but if you're raised Greek and German, you know what I'm going to say. It means you will be raised Greek. That's just the way it breaks down. Like Greeks, they're crazy. Like they feel like they've discovered this great thing called Greekness, and they want to share it with you. It's they're evangelists for being Greek. And so I grew up in the Greek Orthodox Church, but it's an interesting thing because my parents coming here in the 50s, coming from Greece and Germany, they clearly appreciated this country. They loved this country. They're legal immigrants, right? They worked hard to become Americans. They wanted to become Americans. And that's an idea that is, to some extent, been lost. The magic of what this country is. And because I was raised by my dear parents, I always heard that this is a great country. And it wasn't like, we were big conservatives or evangelical Christians or something, but like the basics of that. Being an American, America is great, and why it is great, and what it has done around the world. That's not something, I wasn't like fed the other stuff until I went to school. Now I write in the book, the new book is called If You Can Keep It, The Forgotten History, The Forgotten Promise of America. We had so many different titles, I can't remember. What did we settle on again? Which one do we pick? If You Can Keep It, The Forgotten Promise of American Liberty. The promise of liberty. It's a glorious promise to the whole world that God gave us the privilege of representing. And, that's something that I didn't hear about that so much growing up. And so the reason I wrote this book ultimately is because my generation, anybody about my age and younger, didn't get this stuff. We've heard a lot of the negative side because of Vietnam or Watergate, whatever. The whole narrative in the 60s was about everything that we did wrong in America, right? Now, there's nothing wrong with knowing what we did wrong. In fact, it's very healthy to know what we did wrong. But if that's all you're getting a lie. You have to know that everything we did wrong, we tried to make right? You want to talk about slavery? We abolished slavery. A lot of people died so that we could do the right thing on that issue. We worked through our problems. There's something about what the founders gave us in this country which allows us to face our problems and overcome our problems. That narrative was really not taught to me and to my schoolmates and to the people that are younger than me growing up. And it only hit me a few years ago that if America is an idea, now you think about this, right? America is an idea. We're not like a nation like the other nations of the world. I mean, think about this. Like if you're French, France, it's a bunch of Frenchmen in France. There's no idea of Frenchness. You know, like you're French, and there's a culture and whatever, and there's some things, but this is a nation based on an idea. And you need to understand how insane that is, how wild that is, that when the founders decided we're going to create this country, this had never been done in the history of the world. It was a wild idea. How could they think that in the history of the world, there has never been a people who've governed themselves ever, right? Don't people say, oh, they had democracy in Greece. No, they didn't, ladies and gentlemen, okay? And as a Greek, I can tell you, they had little flickers of democracy that did not last long, and they had little city-states. They didn't have a nation. So yes, they gave us the idea, but they weren't able to figure out how to make it work. And we know it was very limited not just in terms of how long, but in terms of the actual way that it worked. Not everybody had a vote, not everybody was equal, and all those ideas. So we have to understand that the idea that the founders gave us in this country is an insane, wild, amazing idea. And to be able to say that this idea actually worked and has worked for over 200 years, we should all be astounded at the concept. And what I want to do in this book is recapture the wildness of this idea. We should all be like, wow. But of course, we have been so successful in exporting the ideas of America that a lot of the world has cherry-picked some of the things, whatever. So a lot of the world kind of looks a little bit the way we do, and we've forgotten that this was a wild idea started by the founders. And so the more I saw that, the more I said, we really have forgotten what it means to be American, and we've forgotten what America is and how it works. And if America is an idea, you need a citizenry that understands the idea, that buys into it, and that lives it out. Now that's a fact. You can't just, coast. There's no coasting, okay? If you coast, if you do not govern yourself, if we are not self-governing, so if you do not govern yourself, whatever that means, you will be governed from above. And we're beginning to see that. As America forgets what it means to be self-governing, we will be governed from above. It's a natural order of things. Somebody will govern. And if we kind of lay back, people will govern us. And that is actually happening now. We're at the edge of the cliff, like we're way down the line, okay? It's like a flower, it's a cut flower, and everybody says, hey, it looks great. Yes, but it's dead, it's dying. It won't look great in a week. It is unattached from the roots. That is where we are in this country. We've become unattached from our roots, and you can coast on that for a little while. I think we've been coasting really well for about 40 years. But I think we're at the end. We're at the end in a number of ways. We're at the end when it comes to debt. I mean, we all know, if you have credit card debt, you all know, I need to take care of that. I need to take care of that. If it gets too high, you won't be able to take care of it. Somebody will have to interfere and take care of it for you. You cannot pay. Once you start where you can't pay the interest, you realize I'm in a hole too big. The hole is too big. Apart from a miracle, I can't get out of the hole. You understand that will happen. It's not some pie in the sky idea. It happened in Greece. It's happening around the country. It's happening in Puerto Rico. Like if you spend too much money, somebody's got to bail you out or whatever. But you're going to be a slave to somebody. And we are there, ladies and gentlemen. I think you get it. Okay, when our debt was like 10 trillion, it was really bad. When it's 19. This is like time that, you go to war, you do something has to happen. You cannot continue. And that's just the fiscal side. When you get to the governmental side, where you have the Supreme Court, and we'll talk about this later, but something is dramatically wrong. And we've been going and going and going. And people say, well, haven't they always been saying that? Like wasn't the election of 1980 supposed to be the most important election? Well, let me tell you something. Things are different now, and we'll talk about that later. But the idea is that my folks raised me. I was a son of immigrants, and I had a really healthy appreciation for this kind of stuff. I remember in 1973, when I was in 5th grade, our teacher took us out. I write about this in the book, and we celebrated Flag Day. And I feel like because my teacher was like in her early 70s, this was her last year in school, this was the last gasp of another era. She probably had been doing this with her 5th grade classes for 4 decades. And I got to stand there at the flagpole, and my trumpet teacher played My Country 'Tis of Thee, and we sang, and it was a holy, beautiful moment. And I'll never forget it for the rest of my life. And I was being taught, you understand, I was being taught that day, without words, I was being taught to love my country. Now, since the beginning of time, people have been taught to love their countries. There's something healthy about that, about loving your family, about being proud of your town, your city, your state. There's something healthy about that. It doesn't mean that you're a jingoistic yahoo that says America's great and all you guys, stink. That's not proper pride. Proper pride is a godly pride that says, I'm proud of my family. We're not perfect, but this is my family. I'm proud of my town, of my state. It might not be perfect, but this is my state. This is my town. That's very important. There's a Greek proverb that he who does not boast about his house, the house will fall on him and crush him, right? And there was just something healthy about loving your country. And part of loving country is recognizing what's wrong with it. But it also means celebrating what's right with it. So I feel like I grew up where that wasn't really communicated, okay? In the media, we weren't making films like Mr. Smith Goes to Washington. We had really moved past that with the 60s. But we never kind of acknowledged it. We've just kept going. Then I went to college. I had the great privilege and the great misfortune of going to Yale University, which is ever so slightly secular. You may have noticed that. To be perfectly fair, they've only been that way for like 210 years, I would say. Before that, they were rock solid. But I went into an environment where, I grew up in a working class European immigrant environment, but then suddenly I'm at Yale and I'm thinking, oh, how do the elites think? Well, the way they think was the dramatic version of what I'm talking about. It was political correctness already in the 80s. It was a strong sense of America's patriotism is out. We don't do that. And so I graduated into the wide world, wanted to be a writer, and I think that to cut to the chase, I became a Christian seriously around my 25th birthday, and everything changed. And suddenly I realized the people that I liked, the people that I was hanging out with, loved America. Some of them were really patriotic, and I thought, I have never seen this. If my Yale friends could get a load of this, they would be squirming to sing God Bless America. That's just corny and that's nuts. That's the world in which I grew up. That was the milieu of Yale and the world at Yale. And now the elite cultures in America, that's kind of where they're coming from, right? We could see this in the current president in this administration. It's almost like an embarrassment about America's strength. And it's an idea, I actually talk about this in my 7 Men book, where God's idea of strength means strength used for others, right? If I'm a strong man, that strength is not given to me so that I can bully others, right? So that I can beat my wife and terrorize my children. That's not what God gives you strength for. It's so you can protect those that God has put around you. The same thing with America. If America is strong, the whole idea is America can be strong to stop the bullies of the world, to be a force for good. But you have this idea that, no, strength is bad. Strength hurts people. America is a bully on the world stage, so we need to bring it down a notch, right? Now, folks, that's a point of view, and I'm here to say that's wrong. If America is weak, the bullies of the world will bully those who are weaker. And there's no way, you can't get out of that. You can't get out of that. It's the same thing that it's a long story, but that idea is very strong in our culture right now. And so I never really thought about this too deeply, but a number of years ago, my friend Os Guinness wrote a book called A Free People's Suicide. And like the book I just mentioned by Larry Taunton, The Faith of Christopher Hitchens, when I read that book, I just flipped. I said, I want everyone I know to read this book. This is one of those books, and I just raved about it like a maniac for months and months and months and months. And I hope a whole bunch of people read that book. I didn't even have a radio program at that time, but there's sometimes you find something and you say, people need to hear this. This is important. And as I said before, Os Guinness was not on Stephen Colbert's show, but people don't talk about this. Charlie Rose was not inviting him on. It's hard for us to get these ideas out. And we've got to understand that these ideas are important. There are people who are open to these ideas, but they will never hear it unless you help them to hear it. And so when I saw this book by Os Guinness, I had him speak at Socrates in the City. And I even remember when he gave his speech, he talked about what I write is a chapter in my book on this called The Golden Triangle of Freedom. And this is simply it. And this is at the heart of who we are as a people. Very important idea. And I'll bet you've never heard of this unless you read Os Guinness's book. He says, this is so simple. Freedom requires virtue. Now, I never thought of that. I never heard that in school. Definitely didn't hear it at Yale. What do you mean freedom requires virtue? Because you say so? What do you mean? Well, it's simple. Self-government means you have to govern yourself, right? In other words, if you're going to be governed from above, you can be a creep and a bum, but the people with their guns are going to keep you from doing anything wrong. But if you want to govern yourself, you need to be virtuous. You need to say, I'm not going to steal because it's wrong. That's called virtue. I'm not going to steal not because somebody's going to shoot me if they catch me, but because it's wrong. And the founders, all of them, every one of them understood that the freedom we're talking about, self-government, requires, it's not suggested, it requires virtue. If we don't have a population that is, roughly speaking, virtuous, there can be no self-government. So faith requires virtue. Virtue, in turn, requires faith, because why would people be virtuous? Mainly, the founders understood that when people are serious about their faith, serious about the God that they worship, they tend to be virtuous. It's something they saw. Benjamin Franklin was a big proponent of this. That's why he was such a big fan of George Whitefield. He didn't really buy into everything that Whitefield was preaching, but he said, you know what? When those crowds go to hear Whitefield, something happens, they change, they become better people, we need less policemen. Like, this works. Whether you agree with it or not, it works. He saw it. So the triangle is that faith requires virtue. Virtue requires faith. Freedom requires virtue. Virtue requires faith. And now it doesn't need to be faith in the God of the Bible, okay? It could just be the faith in a higher order, okay? It tends to be the God of the Bible, but I'm saying that even if you believe in some higher order or whatever, you have to have faith in something beyond yourself to be virtuous, to say, I will not do this and I will do that, even though nobody's forcing me. They all understood this. Again, the golden triangle of freedom. Freedom requires virtue. Virtue requires faith. And then faith, in turn, requires freedom. Think about that. The faith that we have in this country is free faith. It is not coerced, okay? You can go to all countries around the world, and all through history, they had coerced faith. You're a Frenchman, you're a Catholic. You're Greek, you're Greek Orthodox. You're German, you're Lutheran. We don't have any of this freedom stuff here. You're in England? Well, what is the king? Is the king Catholic? Is the king Protestant? Whatever the king is, you better go along with that, and if not, you're going to be persecuted. That is why America was formed. Why did the Pilgrims leave England for Holland, and then leave Holland for the cold coast of Plymouth, Massachusetts? Why did they do that? Because they were not allowed to practice their own faith freely. Their faith was being forced on them, and they were being horribly persecuted, thrown in prisons. You don't think about that, right? The Pilgrims, they were being thrown in prisons for their faith. So they came here. But our whole country is a history of all kinds of people leaving Europe, which had coerced religion, which, as you know, is no religion at all. If it is coerced, it is garbage. You cannot coerce people when it comes to conscience. The people in America understood that in a way that no one in the history of the world has ever understood, that faith needs to be free. We believe in freedom. We believe in the free market. We believe in freedom, that if there's a level playing field, the cream rises to the top. The best ideas, the best churches, the best whatever, we're going to let people do what they want, and we're going to trust that it's going to work out. So we had freedom of religion, and the founders understood that if you don't have freedom of religion, the whole thing breaks down, okay? So you need, again, the golden triangle of freedom, this self-reinforcing triangle, that freedom requires virtue. Every one of the founders said this. Not just the religious ones. Every single one said this. Virtue requires faith. Faith requires freedom. Now, I remember when Os Guinness unpacked this, I remember thinking, Have you ever written this anywhere, Oz? Like because I did, no, I'm sorry, I heard it before he wrote the book. And I remember thinking, this isn't like a wild idea. This is a great idea. This is so basic, but I've never seen this. I've never heard of this golden triangle of freedom. I grew up in America, going to good schools. I've never heard this stuff. You've got to write about it. And so obviously he wrote about it in his book, but I just thought, how many people have read his book? He was not, on TV talking about this. He doesn't have a radio show to talk about this every day. This is the idea behind the United States of America. And if America is an idea, and this is at the heart of these ideas, and we don't know it, how can we govern ourselves? We don't even know how it's supposed to work. Now, sometimes you know these things by osmosis, right? You don't even have it conscious in your mind. You just know that the way this works is people are good, and people don't steal, and we kind of govern ourselves. We don't need to be governed from above. We get that. We get the idea of that kind of freedom. If you don't understand all that stuff, when things go wrong, you won't say, hey, wait a minute, something's wrong. So the other day when Obama, pronounced this edict that every public school must now have this policy on transgender bathrooms or something, you can put that issue aside. Forget about the issue. Let's not argue about the issue. It's the concept of a president acting like a king and saying, you will do that. Now, if America were healthy, and if we all were being the kind of Americans that I write about in this book, do you know what would happen when a president did that? Everybody would say, excuse me? We're going to do what? I don't think so. Go back to your office. You don't seem to understand how this works. It doesn't work that way. We won our freedom with blood from a tyrant who didn't understand this stuff. And for 200 plus years, we have understood that we have self-government and that we have states, we have Congress, we have all kinds of things put in place so that we can pick our leaders and our leaders can argue this out in Congress and so on and so forth. We have systems in place that help us govern ourselves. We can't have an edict from on high. That's anathema to us. It's offensive to Americans who are free. But so many Americans don't understand this anymore or don't live this anymore that they were kind of like, well, geez, okay, I don't know. We should be outraged. Tea should be thrown into the harbor when things like this happen. And I really feel like if you get that, and I get that, it's our mission to help other people get this, to help other people understand that this is America. We don't have any other options. We will go downhill. We will cease to be what the founders hoped that we would be. Now, I also want to say that pride in America is not nationalism the way people sometimes understand nationalism, right? And I think that those of us who describe ourselves as conservatives, need to understand this, okay? That if I'm proud of America, I'm only proud of what is good about America, right? I don't go, America, love it or leave it. If you don't agree with me, screw you. That is not the American way. The American way is to say we are proud of what is beautiful and noble and true. And by the way, we want to export these ideas to the whole world. These ideas aren't for us. God gave these ideas to us. We have the privilege of these freedoms to share with the whole world. Anybody who wants these ideas, we wish the whole world would become like America. This isn't for us to keep. This is for the whole world. And yes, we would like as many immigrants as possible if we can handle them. But if we don't have a booming economy and a strong culture and a confident culture, they're going to handle us and we're going to cease to be America. And we need to understand that these ideas are for the whole world, that we have been chosen by God. Now, this sounds like triumphalist stuff, but it was Abraham Lincoln who called us the almost chosen people. And I write that about in the book too, that Abraham Lincoln had a view that America was chosen by God to bless the rest of the world. Now that view goes all the way back to the founders and way back before the founders to John Winthrop on the Arbella in 1630, coming to the Plymouth Bay colony. He said, we are as a city set on a hill. Now where did he get that from? Thucydides? No. Jesus, right? You knew that. That's Jesus. We are to be a city set on a hill. John Winthrop, who was the governor of the Plymouth Bay Colony, 1630, who was also a minister, said, we are to be a city set on a hill. We're not here for ourselves, like leave us alone. Now that's always been part of the American strain, like leave me alone, I get my 40 acres and a mule, don't bother me, whatever. There's something healthy about that, okay? But at the end of the day, the founders said, These freedoms that we have are so that we would shine like a city on a hill, so that the world would goggle at us and say, can we have that freedom too? Can we live like that? How do you do that? Well, part of how we do it is most Americans had a robust faith in Jesus of Nazareth and worshiped him and worshiped in the churches, and the founders all understood that if you have a citizenry that is serious about God, good things will come out of that. Self-government will come out of that, but more than that, we abolished slavery in this country. We abolished Jim Crow in this country. Most of that was because of religious people, was because of churches. It wasn't a secular movement. We need to understand what the founders understood, that real faith, not hypocritical religion, not forced religion, but real faith is a boon to any society. And this society has only been able to be truly free and to bless others as we have mostly lived out our faith. The faith is not coerced. You cannot force an atheist to believe. You cannot force somebody to believe the way you do. That's the beauty of the freedom of America and the freedom of religion. That we can duke it out. We can argue with each other and help each other see what we don't see. What they don't see, and we can learn, and we can come to a consensus. Nothing is forced, but that has allowed us to be a free people. And the founders understood this. The people before the founders understood this. We're a city on a hill, a shining city on a hill, gleaming so that others can see it. Now, you think about that. That is a biblical idea. In Genesis 12, I think it is, or 9 or 12, where you have Abraham and the concept of you will be blessed to be a blessing. God doesn't bless you so you can take the money and run. God blesses you because he loves you, but he loves everyone else besides you, and he wants you to bless them with what he has blessed you, right? So if you get rich, you understand that if God has blessed me with this, I need to do something with this. Now, that doesn't mean I need to get rid of all of it so that I can't bless any more people, but I can create jobs. I can give money away. I can create institutions. God has blessed me to be a blessing. If God has given you talent or time or anything God has given you, it is to be a blessing. Now, he's not going to force you. You can spend it on yourself. You can get 4 boats. Do what you like. I know I'm in Colorado. You don't get a lot of boats here, I know. But you understand what I'm saying is that we're free, and to be free is a chilling thing because God will hold you responsible for your freedom. The freedom you have, the wealth you have, the talent you have, the time you have, God gave it all to you for his purposes. Now, that's not to be, a guilt trip, but it's to remind you that to be truly free and truly yourself, you need to give it back to God, however that works out. It might not be in some kind of ministry situation, but the point is whatever we're talking about, whether it's volunteering during the election or whatever it is, God has blessed us to be a blessing, and he's blessed America to be a blessing. Tocqueville, he never said the actual quote, but the guts of what he says in his great book, Democracy in America, he says that the greatness of America comes from the goodness of America. He saw in the churches the flame of freedom, and that we were a different kind of people than had ever existed in the world, and it came from our faith. Now, that's 50 years after the founding, but the founders understood this as well. They all understood this, and they all wrote about it. And I have the quotes in my book, and you read it, and you say, how can they say this? Like, these people are presidents of the United States, and they're talking about faith in this way? People don't talk about this anymore this way. Like, they'll make some little proclamation or something. But to understand that at the heart of the American experiment is this idea of robust faith. It can't work any other way. Jefferson got it. Franklin got it. The most secular of the founders understood this stuff, that we are blessed to be a blessing. That this is the engine, that we create jobs and we create markets and all of these kinds of things, whether economically or otherwise. We are chosen by God to be a blessing to the whole world. Now, if you think about that, I live in New York City, and from the Empire State Building, I can actually see the Statue of Liberty. And, I think about my parents in their early 20s coming in a ship with nothing, passing the Statue of Liberty. And my mother said to me, I asked her about this, I said, well, what was that like? She says, it was 5 a.m. and we were sleeping, and one of the stewards or somebody knocked on our door. And of course, she was like down in steerage, 4 flights below the deck in some cramped room with somebody. And she says, we got dressed quickly, and we walked upstairs, and there it was, the Statue of Liberty, huge. And she says it was very emotional. We forget, and this is why I wrote this book and what I'm saying now. We need to remember, ladies and gentlemen, we need to be reminded of what is true and what we have forgotten. Why did my mother get choked up when she saw the Statue of Liberty? I'll tell you why. First of all, it's beautiful. It's not some abstract piece of junk. It's actually beautiful. It moves your heart when you look at it. It's beautiful, and when I say beautiful, I don't mean sexy. I mean noble. There's a nobility. When you look at it, something in your heart, even if you don't think of the word noble, there's a nobility and a dignity to this statue. And it stands there, and it represents America. And to somebody who came from a war-torn country where she experienced actual hunger and malnutrition, and from my father who experienced the horrors of World War II, to see that beacon of liberty, they don't say like, yeah, it's a great idea, but they don't exactly live it out, do they? No, he didn't say that, and my mother didn't say that. They looked at it and they said, no, this is true. This is real. Oh, it might not be perfect, but you know what? I'm on a ship to get here. I'm not going someplace else. I want to be here. This is a place of freedom. All those corny ideas are true. And people who come from the other side, they recognize it. We might not recognize it because we go, well, we've always had it like this. It's not such a big deal, is it? It's a huge deal. In the history of the world, people don't have this. In the history of the world, these are things they only dream about. Do you realize that when Reagan said, Mr. Gorbachev, tear down that wall, everybody in the State Department said, you can't say that. And Reagan said, yeah, you can jump in a lake. I'm going to say it. You know why I'm going to say it? Because there are people suffering in the gulag, being tortured, eating rats, dreaming that America would be strong enough that someday they might be free. And when they heard through the grapevine that Reagan had said that to Gorbachev, it gave them hope. You know, there are people around the world, they need hope. They need hope. We all need hope. But imagine being in a prison in North Korea. Imagine being someplace around the world where there's nothing. There's no jobs. Imagine being in Greece. I've been to Greece every year for the last few years to visit my relatives and stuff. There's no hope. What do you do when you're down to your last dime and Angela Merkel and the European Union is what does anybody do? What do you say? There's really not much to say, folks. They're not going to become like America tomorrow. Now, I know that Jesus is the answer, and I know that that's what they need, but in terms of the policies and the government, and that they've come to the end of the rope where we're going to be a few $1 trillion from now if we don't do something about it. And they're like, well, that's it. We can just groove on the rubble, like have a good time. What are we going to do? They're desperate. They need hope. There have been people all around the world that have needed hope. America has offered hope. And the Statue of Liberty, holding out her torch, says to the world, we are here for you. We're not here for ourselves. We're here for you. We want to be so rich and so strong that we can welcome the whole world, that we can export our ideas and our products. We want everyone to have what we have, especially if you're Christian, you get that, right? You want people to be blessed. You don't want them to suffer so that you can have what you have. And the socialist liberal idea that it's a zero-sum game, that like we're rich and that's why they're poor, that's exactly wrong. That's exactly wrong, okay? I mean, imagine if you're really suffering and your neighbor is really, really rich. That neighbor might give you a job or might give you money. If that neighbor is poor, they're not giving you anything, right? You're just going to, play your banjos together at night. America has the potential to bless the whole world. And we must not forget that the vision of the founders, the people before the founders, the vision of Lincoln was that we are chosen by God to have all the freedoms and all these blessings for the whole world. So if you care about the rest of the world, if you care about Mexico, if you care about the rest of the world, you need to care about America. You need to have pride and love for this country. I talk in the book about loving the country, how we need to teach our children and we need to remember to love our country. When I heard my mother tell that story about passing by the Statue of Liberty and getting choked up, I got choked up. And I thought, shame on me that I don't have this view of this country. We've lost our first love. We've lost our first love. Now, you understand what that applies to when it comes to your faith, but think about this country. Imagine having a view of this country that if you'd never seen it before and you saw it for the first time. I want us to understand that. That's what I write about in the book, is just the idea of self-government, to be agog at the crazy idea of self-government. The whole world was astounded that Washington and these people, what are they doing? Can it work? It shouldn't work, really, but by a miracle, and the miracle is the faith of the American people and a number of other things, it has worked and worked and worked and worked, but we have recently forgotten our first love. We don't see ourselves as those who are suffering see us, as my parents saw us when they came into that harbor in the mid-50s, like, wow, America, the land of opportunity, I'm here. And my parents worked hard because they believed that this country will give you a fair shake. And as a result of their faith in the way that this nation worked, they put their heads down and they worked hard, menial jobs, so that their kids could live in a house and they could go to college and they could have things that they wouldn't have. Folks, that's a big deal. If we forget that, there are so many young people around this world, they would do anything for that. It's really up to us to remember it, to hold the torch high. That's the brief version of what I wanted to say. Thank you. I just, there's so much else I want to say, but that's the heart of it, that we need to remember. And let me just close with this, which is what I probably should have said in the beginning. The title of the book, some of you will remember, and most of us won't, but Benjamin Franklin, when he was leaving Independence Hall in Philadelphia, 1787, they had just created the Constitution of the United States. Now, all this history, don't let me kid you, I was fuzzy on all this stuff. But in writing this book, I relearned what I had heard in junior high and in high school, whatever that. Like, wow, in 1776 we did this thing, and it didn't work. Like, we were free from the British, but we didn't have the right kind of government. In 1783, like, okay, we're here, let's go. We had all kinds of problems. They had to go back to the drawing board to Philadelphia in 1787 to create the Constitution. What were they going to create? They didn't know. And they will tell you, and I quote them in the book, they said it was a miracle that they were able to figure it out. To compromise slave states, compromising with anti-slave states, on and on and on. It was a miracle. And Franklin said we should pray to break the deadlock. This is crazy stuff. This is Franklin calling on all of them to pray. Franklin. And when it was all over, they had created the government that we now take for granted and are pretty much wrecking on our watch. This a miracle of God to bless the whole world. And Franklin comes out of Independence Hall, the sage of the Constitution. He was 81 that year. And a 34-year-old delegate, McHenry, happened to be there listening to this conversation. If he hadn't been there and hadn't written this down, we wouldn't know this, but he wrote it down. He heard the conversation. Franklin comes out, and a woman, Mrs. Powell of Philadelphia, and I remember Franklin had lived in Philadelphia since he was 17 years old. He's 81 now. He probably knew all kinds of people. I'm guessing Mrs. Powell was some, dowager saying, Dr. Franklin, like she knew him, Dr. Franklin, what have you given us? A monarchy or a republic? Now, this wasn't entirely facetious. They had no idea because they understand that the government was too weak to work. So does this mean they need to go back to a monarchy? Do we still have self-government? Can we still have self-government with a slightly stronger federal government? Is it going to work? And he says to her, a republic, madam, if you can keep it. Now, think about that. Have you given us a monarchy or a republic? A republic, madam, if you, and that's you and me, if you can keep it. It is yours to lose or yours to keep. We've given it to you, and now we're moving on. And for 200 years, we have kept it because we have understood how to keep it. We've understood that it is our job, we the people, it's not just some idea, it's our job to keep it. It is my thesis that we have forgotten how to keep it, we have not been keeping it, and we are dying. And I'm not here to speak hopelessness. I am very hopeful. Trust me, I'm not just saying that. I am very hopeful. But it's kind of like being hopeful before a battle. You know you're going to win, but you got to fight the battle. God will be with you, but you got to fight the battle. I believe as God is calling us to keep this nation. So this is like a trumpet blast from the ramparts to say, okay, folks, let's get busy. We've got to keep this nation. This is serious. We've got to teach our children about this country. We've got to teach our children to love this country. We've got to teach our children who is Paul Revere, Nathan Hale, and George Washington, and Valley Forge. We've got to celebrate these things and rejoice that we have the privilege to call ourselves Americans. Amen. God bless you. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. God bless you. Thank you.